It's not easy to forget the deaths of 50 million people, but we have managed it. A global drought in the 1870s caused mass starvation in South America, Africa, and Asia, but the event doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. Now it seems the drought was triggered by a never-before-seen combination of climate events. While rare, the drought was entirely natural, so it could easily happen again. Most studies into the effects of social media use and screen time are badly flawed. This is because researchers use surveys to find out people's technology use, but how much we think we spend glued to our devices and how much we actually use them are almost completely unrelated. Researchers have used self-reported surveys to justify claims like increasing smartphone use is causing teenage suicide. Economic conditions in the Himalayas partly depend on the limited resources available in different parts of that vast region of varied ecological zones. The principal activity is animal husbandry, but forestry, trade, and tourism are also important. The Himalayas abound in economic resources. Those include pockets of rich arable land, extensive grasslands and forests, and great natural beauty. Being nestled in the midst of the snowy mountains, there are found here many medical herbs of much value. Gold, silver and copper are found here, as well as crystal and native copper. The climate is unusually cold and hail and snow often fall. The people are rustic and common in appearance. They are tough and fierce by nature, although they greatly regard justice and bravery. Pluto is disqualified not because it is considerably smaller than the 8 classical planets, but because it has a highly elliptical orbit. Pluto is usually, but not always, further from the Sun than Neptune. The latter can now reclaim the undisputed title of the outermost planet, which it lost in 1930, when Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto and immediately claimed it as a planet. In the event that an object does not have sufficient allocation to support a desired transaction, an allocation transfer may be requested. An allocation transfer may be executed by completion of an allocation transfer request form. After the business manager completes the form, it should be sent to the vice presidential coordinator of the division for approval. Apple said the problem was that aging lithium batteries delivered power unevenly, which could cause iPhones to shut down unexpectedly, endangering the delicate circuits inside. At least 8 separate class action lawsuits have been filed in the U.S. in relation to the admission. Plaintiffs in California and New York all argue that Apple did not have consent to slow their devices. To think of domestication as a form of enslavement or even exploitation is to misconstrue the whole relationship, to project a human idea of power onto what is, in fact, an instance of mutualism between species. Domestication is an evolutionary, rather than a political development. It is certainly not a regime humans imposed on animals some 10,000 years ago. Research has found that expansive postures such as this one helps boost testosterone. Likewise, the posture makes the body appear larger and therefore increases the perception of dominance. Arms akimbo also shows an eagerness to get down to business. Dominant postures are important when you want to take a leadership role and are prepared to accept the responsibility which comes with authority. Studies have shown that the presence of laptops in classrooms is linked to decreased performance in tests and assignments, and fails to close achievement gaps between socioeconomic groups, the digital divide. A comparison between electronic and paper textbooks in science showed that embedded videos and hyperlinks in the former are a distraction and impede learning. Rhinoceros means horn-nosed. For millions of years, black rhinos have used their magnificent horns for protection against lions and other predators, as weapons in territorial disputes with other rhinos, and as tools to dig for mineral salt. For a very small portion of the rhino's history, humans have been using the animal's horns for medicines and dagger handles. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, up to 18 miles wide, and attains a depth of over a mile. Nearly 2 billion years of Earth's geological history have been exposed as the Colorado River. While some aspects about the history of incision of the canyon are debated by geologists, several recent studies support the hypothesis that the river established its course about 5 to 6 million years ago. This species is far too tall and massive for normal half-acre suburbia. It's only appropriate for multi-acre settings, meadows, parks, cemeteries, the grounds of big civic buildings. If you actually do have the room for the immensity all tulip trees would become, plant a small starter plant of your largest possible stretch of open ground, water it attentively that first summer. Welfare is a government support for the citizens and residents of society. Welfare may be provided to people of any income level, as with Social Security, but it is usually intended to ensure that the poor can meet their basic human needs such as food and shelter. Welfare attempts to provide poor people with a minimal level of well-being. The word progressive as used in this essay does not necessarily imply moral approval. It means simply that the tendency or social group so described contributed to the expansion of the wealth of the community. The progressive farming of the 16th and 17th centuries led to of many small peasants. The wealth produced by the new methods came into the hands of a small group of prophets. The most usual explanation of the 17th century revolution is one that was put forward by the leaders of the Parliament of 1640 themselves. And although Parliament in the 17th century was even less genuinely representative of ordinary people than it is at the present day, still its victory was important as establishing a certain amount of self-government in society. The physical location of a restaurant in the competitive landscape of the city has long been known as a major factor in its likely success or failure. Once restaurants are established in such environments, they can do little about their location. All they can do is work to improve customer access to their premises. Throughout its long history, Earth has warmed and cooled time and again. Climate has changed when the planet received more or less sunlight due to subtle shifts in its orbit, as the atmosphere or surface changed, or when the sun's energy varied. But in the past century, another force has started to influence Earth's climate: humanity. Effective treatments can include medication, cognitive and behavioral psychological therapies, psychosocial support, psychiatric disability rehabilitation, avoidance of risk factors such as harmful alcohol and other drug use, and learning self-management skills. It is rarely possible for someone with a mental illness to make the symptoms go away just by strength of will. First-year university students have designed and built a groundbreaking electric car that recharges itself. 50 students from the University of Sydney's Faculty of Engineering spent 5 months cobbling together bits of plywood, foam and fiberglass to build the Mango concept car. They developed the specifications and hand-built the car. It's a pretty radical design, a 4-wheel drive. The first hints of what Ultima Thule really looks like will begin to emerge on December 31st, when the piano-sized spacecraft is still further away from the object than the Earth is to the Moon. Then on January 1st, New Horizons will zoom over Ultima at around 50,000 km per hour, just 3,500 km above the surface, 3 times closer than its approach to Pluto. The term domestication refers to a goal-directed process through which humans have changed physical features of plants and animals by replacing natural through artificial selection to adapt these species to specific human needs. In animals, Domestication-associated changes also include behavioral characteristics, which, above all, have led to a reduction of aggression. It is the duty of every government to give protection to its citizens, of whatever class, color or condition, and especially to those who are duly organized as soldiers in the public service. The law of nations, and the usages and customs of war, as carried on by civilized powers, permit no distinction as to color in the treatment of prisoners of war as public enemies. Marine biologists study organisms that live in an ocean or sea environment. Much of their time is spent in the field collecting data about plant and animal species. This data is then analyzed in a lab or an office to advance the understanding of species and their environments. There are many areas of specialization in marine biology, ranging from animal behavior to marine biotechnology. Governments around the world set a new record in bureaucracy-busting efforts for the domestic private sector, implementing 314 business reforms over the past year, says the World Bank Group's Doing Business 2019, Training for Reform report, released today. The reforms, carried out in 128 economies, benefit small and medium enterprises as well as entrepreneurs, enabling job creation. By gathering and analyzing comprehensive quantitative data to compare business regulation environments across economies and over time, Doing Business encourages economies to compete towards more efficient regulation, offers measurable benchmarks for reform, and serves as a resource for policymakers, academics, journalists, and private sector researchers. The fragility of digital storage media, combined with a high degree of technology dependence, considerably shortens the grace period during which preservation decisions can be deferred. Issues of long-term persistence can arise as soon as the time digital materials are created, for example, in choosing between a wideliest, stable digital format, and one that is obscure. Global warming refers to the increase in the temperatures of Earth's oceans and atmosphere. Most scientists believe that the temperature increases are due to the greenhouse effect. Machines that we make and other human activities emit pollution which subsequently exacerbates the greenhouse effect. It could dramatically change climate zone patterns. England at the beginning of the 17th century was a predominantly agricultural country. The overwhelming mass of the population lived in the countryside, engaged either wholly or partially in producing foodstuffs or wool. For centuries English society had been feudal, made up of isolated local communities producing for their own consumption with very little trade between them. Lincoln's deeply manifested rejection of the system of slavery was indeed quite complex and could not always convince completely. As many other opponents of slavery in his time, Lincoln was of the opinion that this system of unfree labor would morally corrupt the nation and would be diametrically opposed to the basic principles of Republican freedom. This regime is called the administrative state. Its little kings are unelected bureaucrats, officially known as administrators, secretaries, or even czars. And, make no mistake, they are very powerful. Their decisions affect us every day. Put together almost any 3 or 4 random letters and chances are you've stumbled on a government agency. The Chinese space program has kept many details about the mission secret, including the planned timing of the landing, even from scientists who collaborated with it. Before the touchdown, Robert Wimmer-Schweingruber, a physicist at the University of Kiel in Germany who has a radiation detection experiment on the lander, said that he expected to find out from Chinese news sites. For 2 men or 2 women to found a family, that involves, quite often, and particularly if we start with this new policy of redefining marriage, It is not biologically possible for them to do that, and that's not a statement of animus or prejudice against anyone. So we have to look then at areas of assisted reproductive technology, anonymous sperm donation potentially. Stress. It makes your heart pound, your breathing quicken and your forehead sweat. But while stress has been made into a public health enemy, new research suggests that stress may only be bad for you if you believe that to be the case. Psychologist Kelly McGonigal urges us to see stress as a positive, and introduces us to an unsung mechanism for stress reduction, reaching out to others. A work published 10 or 15 years ago might be reasonably current in history, literature, and some areas of mathematics, depending on how fast those fields are changing. For a discipline moving at warp speed like genetics, an article might be out of date within a year. A paper in molecular genetics filled with citations from 1994 or even 2004 would cast serious doubt on the entire project. Scientists have considered the sun climate hypothesis to explain Earth's rapid warming. The evidence collected show that the sun noticeably affects our climate over millions of years, but it is not the cause of recent warming. The rate at which energy from the sun reaches the top of Earth's atmosphere is called total solar irradiance, or TSI. There are plenty options when it comes to flooring in your bedroom. Being the most private and personalized part of your home, your bedroom is the place which grabs a big part of your budget whenever you are remodeling your home. You can use carpet, tile, hardwood, bamboo, cork or laminate. Play with different materials in different rooms. In post-medieval Italy, everything of significance were marked with the uniqueness of fine arts, starting by two masters who brought painting vigor and infinite glory, so the church, followed by states, were provided with artworks in various forms and proffered patronage to artists in return. The revolution altered secular life and forsook obsolete notions while overthrowing feudalism. According to the 2000 census, in the state of California, 39.5% of the residents spoke a language other than English at home. Suppose you take a simple random sample of 100 California residents, and determine the sample proportion who speak a language other than English at home. Draw and label a sketch of this sampling distribution. Since viruses are created for different purposes, their damage to our computer is not all the same. Some of them are found to be made for fun. They are just annoying for they merely cause unknown animation or web page appearing on your screen in a flash. They are actually designed to steal or delete users' important files or just to ruin users' operating system. Periodical, a publication that is issued regularly. It is distinguished from the newspaper in format in that its pages are smaller and are usually bound, and it is published at weekly, monthly, quarterly, or other intervals, rather than daily. Periodicals range from technical and scholarly journals through illustrated magazines for mass circulation. Questions surrounding the duties and obligations of debt, as a piece of the debate over wealth inequality, are becoming some of the most divisive in U.S. society. On one side are those who view banks and the 1% as getting off easy, with special breaks and rules that apply only to them. The life of Lincoln coincided with dramatic societal transformations that shaped the future of the United States. In the center of these developments stood the question whether that nation could continue to grow with the system of slavery or not. Inherently linked to an issue that almost dissolved the nation was the problem of racism and the future of race relations after emancipation. The unknown performance between teams will only add to the intrigue of how each team compares to each other on the first reach of each matchup together. Traditionally, this real intrigue doesn't peak, but with the unprecedented move we'll get a fair idea of how the America's Cup will eventuate in the first few days of racing in May. Being a first-year student at uni can be pretty bloody exciting. Your newfound freedom makes you keen to kick off the next chapter in your life, especially when you have so much freedom in crafting the perfect uni timetable. It certainly beats the rigid schedule that you were forced to repeat week by week in high school. As predators chase down their prey on the open savanna, it's a race for survival. Lions and cheetahs are some of the most athletic animals on the planet, but strength and speed aren't everything. By precisely measuring the movements of predators and prey during hunts, researchers have now modeled the optimum strategy of both hunter and hunted. Researchers from MIT have flown a plane with no moving parts for the first time. It is powered by an ion drive which uses high-powered electrodes to ionize and accelerate air particles, creating an ionic wind. This wind drove a 5-meter-wide craft across a sports hall. Unlike the ion drives, which have powered spacecraft for decades, this new drive uses air as the accelerant. Curious, Coley began injecting patients with bacteria, and indeed, certain among them got better. Presumably, the injection set off an immune response that battled the bacteria and, subsequently, the cancer. But at the time, no one really understood the mechanism, and the treatment was quickly abandoned with the advent of radiation and chemotherapy. The first time you cite a source, it is almost always a good idea to mention its author, title, and genre. If the source is central to your work, you may want to introduce it in a separate sentence or two, summarizing its importance and main ideas. But often you can just tag this information onto the beginning or end of a sentence. The idea that happiness research should at least be considered by policymakers is increasingly becoming a mainstream position. In fact, even the Gallup organization has begun conducting global surveys of happiness, and several countries, such as France, Britain, Australia, and China, are considering using happiness indexes in addition to the conventional economic measures of prosperity and growth.